For years, audiences watched the Owen family live and thrive on their remote Yorkshire farm. Their lives, filled with love and rural charm, became a comforting fixture on television. But when their show disappeared and the family fell silent, questions inevitably surfaced. Now, 3 years later, Raven Owen finally opens up, revealing the real reason behind her mother Amanda's divorce from Clive Owen and what truly unfolded behind those stone walls and windswept hills. What caused the quiet breakdown of a marriage that once seemed unshakable? The sudden cancellation of Our Yorkshire Farm by Channel 5 sent shockwaves through its loyal viewership. Fans who had followed the family's journey on Ravensheath Farm were left stunned, bewildered, and without answers. There was no grand finale, no last episode to provide closure, no emotional farewell to the audience that had grown deeply attached to Amanda and Clive Owen. The network, usually known for its celebratory send-offs, moved on with a vague mention of future projects involving the Owens, but gave no clarity about what had actually happened. This wasn't just the end of a popular TV series, it marked the abrupt disappearance of a family that had shared their lives so openly and authentically with the public. The Owens had long symbolized a life of rustic simplicity, raising their children among the rolling hills of North Yorkshire with sheepdogs and a deep connection to the land. Their show offered more than entertainment, it offered an escape into a slower, more grounded existence. But the show's unexpected end felt like a personal loss, not just for the viewers, but also for the family that had welcomed the world into their home. Behind the scenes, a far more private and painful story was unfolding, one that involved emotional strain and personal upheaval. Once regarded as the epitome of rural harmony, Amanda and Clive were facing internal challenges that weren't being captured on camera. Speculation soon followed. Quiet whispers about their relationship began to spread. Once hailed as the countryside's golden couple, Amanda and Clive were separating, though the news was kept out of the spotlight, a stark contrast to the candid way they had lived on screen. Yet, even before the cameras stopped rolling, cracks had already begun to form in their personal lives. The once lively farm, echoing with the laughter of their children, grew quiet, its stillness reflecting the deeper complexities the show never revealed. This wasn't a routine cancellation, it signaled a deeper shift in the family's reality. Audiences were left wondering, what really happened at Ravensheath Farm? To fans of Our Yorkshire Farm, Amanda and Clive Owen were more than TV personalities, they embodied perseverance, sincerity, and the soul of British country life. Raising 9 children in one of the UK's most remote regions, they were portrayed as the ideal rural couple, hardworking, grounded, and committed to their family, farm, and each other. Their lives were far from easy, shaped by grueling farm chores, harsh Yorkshire winters, and the sheer logistics of raising a large family. Amanda, with her striking presence, wit, and warmth, quickly became the face of the show. Her energy lit up the screen, offering viewers a glimpse into a life many admired. Clive, more reserved, offered a quiet strength. While Amanda captivated audiences, Clive grounded the narrative, content to take a back seat while he managed the farm's most demanding tasks. Over time, however, that balance began to falter. The relentless pressure of public scrutiny and the unending demands of farm and family began to wear them down. The cameras, once capturing their authenticity, also began to expose the wear and tear of life under constant observation. Though their children were largely shielded from the spotlight, they, too, were part of a now fragile story, an idealized rural existence starting to unravel. But the toll wasn't just professional, it was deeply personal. Behind the scenes, Amanda and Clive were growing emotionally distant. The very hardships that had once made them relatable now strained their marriage. And it was Raven, their eldest daughter, who felt these changes most deeply. Always somewhat in the public eye, Raven's role shifted as the family dynamic began to change. No longer just the dependable big sister, she found herself navigating adolescence in the midst of a family quietly falling apart. She became the unspoken witness to the cracks forming in what the world saw as a perfect family. As the Owen household withdrew from public view, Raven became the center of speculation. Why had the once open family chosen silence? What really happened off camera? And had fame itself, once embraced, begun to consume them? After years of silence, Raven is ready to speak. The time has come to reveal what the world never saw, and to explain why Amanda Owen ended her marriage with Clive. Raven Owen, once the quiet observer, was just 12 when filming began. Thrust into the public eye, she wasn't simply a child living on a farm, she was part of a family whose every move was broadcast to millions. As cameras rolled, capturing her parents' seemingly idyllic life, Raven watched quietly from the sidelines. The world saw a charming shepherdess and a devoted father, but Raven saw more. She saw Amanda, the strong matriarch, struggling to keep everything from falling apart. She saw Clive, a man whose love for his children was clear, slowly breaking under years of strain. Growing up in front of the camera, Raven matured quickly. She took on the role of protector, shielding her younger siblings from the growing public curiosity and scrutiny. She channeled her energy into her studies, choosing veterinary science, a career that reflected both her love for animals and the land she grew up on. Working tirelessly, often through the night, Raven learned to live with sacrifice and quiet strength. As rumors swirled and headlines speculated, she stayed silent, not out of fear, but because the truth still hurt too much. She wasn't ready, not then. Now, as the one who quietly witnessed the slow unraveling of her parents' relationship, Raven Owen is ready. Ready to tell her story. Ready to share what happened when the cameras stopped, the world moved on, and the silence remained. When the cameras finally stopped rolling, life at Raven Seat Farm didn't simply snap back to what it once was, it couldn't. The routine stayed the same, the early mornings, the biting winters, the endless work of tending to livestock. But the family that had once appeared so close, bonded under the bright lights of television, was no longer whole. Amanda, after years of enduring the pressure of a life constantly under public view, chose to leave. She moved out, leaving Clive to care for their younger children. What initially appeared to be a peaceful, mutual decision to separate turned out to be far more profound. It marked the closing of a chapter, the end of a carefully built image that had been nurtured for years. At first glance, their split seemed rational, even businesslike. With the show finished and filming wrapped, both Amanda and Clive quietly moved on in their separate directions. But the truth, hidden from the lens, had long existed beneath the surface. Without the filter of the cameras, the fractures in their marriage began to show more clearly. The illusion of perfect rural life started to fall apart. Speculation began almost instantly. Online forums lit up. Was it the pressure of fame that had driven them apart? Did their sudden celebrity status create distance? Was there someone else involved? Had it all just become too much? The world was eager for answers, but Amanda and Clive never offered them. They stayed silent, never indulging the public's hunger for an explanation. Raven, their daughter, remained quiet too. She stood on the sidelines, watching her parents' marriage come undone and the family dynamics shift. It wasn't that she didn't understand what had happened, it was that she wasn't ready to share it. The pain was too raw, the emotional wound still fresh. Time passed, and although Raven maintained a presence on social media, her content was cautious and deliberate. Her posts offered glimpses into her life, professional achievements, updates on her health, snippets of her day, but they never revealed too much. Occasionally, family photos would appear, though always carefully framed. Nothing too personal. Amanda leaned into her new role as a public figure, embracing speaking engagements and a growing Instagram following. Clive, in contrast, remained deeply connected to the farm, continuing his work with Ruben and appearing on spin-off projects. Meanwhile, Raven chose the background, allowing the rest of her family's story to unfold publicly while she stayed quiet. Even in her silence, Raven's followers remained devoted. They watched, waiting, sensing that there was more to the story, her story. Some had followed her since the earliest days of our Yorkshire farm, emotionally invested in the family's triumphs and struggles. She still posted from time to time, a scenic walk, a nourishing meal, a graduation celebration, but what was most striking was what wasn't said. The absence in the spaces between the images sparked curiosity. What was really happening behind the scenes? What was she feeling? Though her posts kept the truth at a distance, they couldn't prevent the quiet speculation from growing. Then, one evening, something changed. Raven shared a story, a black screen with stark white text, "It's time to tell everything." No tags, no clues, no fanfare. There was no scandal to bait the public, no promise of a dramatic tell-all. It wasn't a publicity stunt, it was a release. A quiet but powerful declaration. After years of silence, Raven had chosen to speak. This wasn't an outburst or an accusation. It wasn't an attempt to stir controversy. This was her truth, and finally, she was ready to share it, in her own words, on her own terms. It wasn't the beginning of a media storm. It was the beginning of something more meaningful, healing. The silence that had long surrounded her had lifted. All that remained was a simple, compelling message: it's time to tell everything. Raven Owen was ready, and the world was listening. Her story was never going to be told through explosive headlines or dramatic fallouts. It was quieter than that, and in many ways, far more painful. There were no shocking betrayals, no flashing police lights on the hillsides of Yorkshire. The collapse of her parents' marriage was slow and subtle. It wasn't a public spectacle, it happened in private, in the empty pauses, in conversations that never quite happened, in glances that no longer held warmth. Amanda had long been the engine behind the family. On camera, she was the iconic shepherdess, mother, matriarch, the face of their success. But behind that image, Raven saw a woman who felt trapped. Amanda had become the person everyone expected her to be, always present, always performing. Somewhere along the way, the Amanda behind the scenes faded, buried under the weight of public life. The relentless pressure of being both caregiver and media figure was heavy. Though she kept the family together for years, the cost was steep. Clive, by contrast, was grounded in the old ways. Quiet and steadfast, he found comfort in the simplicity of farm life. He never craved the spotlight, and the fame brought on by the show never quite sat right with him. He wasn't bitter, just deeply committed to the life they had before all the attention. But what had once been a complementary difference in personalities became a dividing line. In the silence of their home, the emotional distance between them grew. There were no loud arguments, just a soft but painful fading of connection. Their bond, once rooted in shared purpose and passion, slowly dissolved. They were still married, still under the same roof, but they had begun to drift apart. There wasn't one dramatic event, no specific turning point, just a growing understanding that something was no longer right. They spoke less. They stopped meeting each other's eyes. The love was still there, perhaps, but obscured by silence. Raven saw it all. She saw her mother grow quieter, more withdrawn. She watched as Amanda, burdened by thoughts left unspoken, slowly began to retreat. And in that quiet unraveling, Raven's story began, not with noise, but with the quiet ache of everything left unsaid. Amanda, once so vibrant and full of purpose, seemed to fade into the background of her own life. And Clive, though always present, seemed increasingly preoccupied with his own quiet discontent. Raven watched this gradual shift with a quiet sorrow, unable to intervene, unsure of how to fix what was broken. When Amanda finally made the decision to leave, it wasn't born out of anger or bitterness. It wasn't about finding someone else or seeking revenge, it was about survival. Amanda needed air, she needed space to breathe again. She had given so much of herself to everyone else for so long that she had lost sight of who she was. She wasn't just Amanda the shepherdess or Amanda the mother, she was Amanda, a woman who had a life, a mind, a spirit that deserved to exist beyond the role she had played for so many years. The decision to leave was not a rejection of Clive, it was a reclaiming of herself. Raven, in her quiet way, understood this more than anyone. She had seen the gradual shift long before it became public. She had seen the exhaustion in her mother's eyes, the silent desperation to rediscover a sense of self. But even though she understood, that didn't mean it was easy. The fractures between her parents were not something that could be repaired overnight, and Raven knew that she couldn't fix them. All she could do was watch, bear witness, and try to understand. In the end, Raven saw her mother not as the TV personality or the figurehead of a family empire, but as a woman who had been trying to survive, a woman who, in the quietest of ways, had given everything she could until there was nothing left to give. After the divorce, Amanda didn't collapse in the way many expected. There was no public meltdown, no breakdown that played out for the cameras. Instead, she quietly picked herself up and began to rebuild. She moved to a new place, found a new sense of independence, and began to reconnect with the world outside of the farm. She took to writing and speaking, finding new ways to express herself beyond the role of mom from TV or the shepherdess. But critics were quick to label her. They accused her of chasing fame, of seeking attention, of abandoning the life she had once seemed so devoted to. To them, Amanda's reinvention looked like something less authentic, like a desperate grab for relevance. They didn't see what Raven saw. They didn't see a woman who had spent years sacrificing her own identity for the sake of her family and the image they had created. Raven, however, understood. She didn't always agree with her mother's choices, but she recognized the journey Amanda was on. For the first time, she wasn't seeing Amanda as the perfect mother or the superwoman from TV, she was seeing Amanda as a person, someone who had been lost in the roles others had cast her in. Raven could now see her mother's struggles through a different lens, one of empathy and compassion. Amanda wasn't rebuilding for the sake of fame or recognition. She was rebuilding for herself. She was trying to find joy, peace, and a sense of wholeness that had eluded her for so many years. Raven knew this, even if the world didn't. She had watched her mother quietly navigate the difficult journey of self-discovery, and as she did, Raven couldn't help but feel a sense of awe. It wasn't always pretty. It wasn't always easy. But it was necessary, for Amanda, and for the woman Raven was growing into. Through it all, Raven knew that the woman behind the camera, her mother, was not just a character to be defined by others. She was a woman in her own right, trying to navigate the same messy, beautiful, and painful journey of life that anyone else did. And for the first time in a long time, Amanda was starting to find her way back to herself. Clive's quiet grief. Clive Owen was never a man of words. He didn't stand before cameras or spill his heart in interviews. In a world obsessed with self-promotion and public narratives, Clive was a quiet figure, withdrawn from the prying eyes of the public. Even as his marriage to Amanda faltered, even as the world speculated about their lives, Clive remained steadfast in his silence. But Raven, in her quiet reflection, offered a glimpse into that silence, a silence that was not born of apathy but of deep, unspoken sorrow. Through her eyes, we saw a man who had been shaped by the weight of unexpressed grief. Clive wasn't indifferent. He wasn't cold or detached. What he carried was the heavy burden of a love lost, an unacknowledged mourning that consumed him quietly, without fanfare. He missed Amanda. He missed the life they had built together on the farm, the shared purpose that had once bound them. But he couldn't find the words to voice it, and he couldn't bring himself to break the silence that had settled between them. Instead, Clive threw himself into his role as a father. His connection with Reuben, his right hand on the farm, grew stronger in the absence of Amanda's presence. Reuben became his anchor, his companion in the solitude that followed. Together, they continued the work on the farm, keeping the wheels turning. But despite the closeness with Reuben, a chasm remained between Clive and Raven. There was no malice in the air, just an unspoken distance, a quiet gap that no one seemed able to bridge. It wasn't resentment, it was simply space, the space that grief creates, a space that can feel like both an ocean and a desert. Clive, in his grief, had retreated into himself. He couldn't change the past. He couldn't fix what had been broken. And in his silence, there was no accusation, no blame, just the kind of pain that's too raw to speak, too deep to articulate. Raven saw him for who he was in that moment, not a man avoiding his emotions, but one who had been swallowed by them. What the silence meant, Raven's decision to break her silence came not from a desire to hurt, to expose, or to cause drama. It came from a place of healing, a need to untangle the years of unspoken grief that had been silently wearing her down. Her words weren't a confrontation, they were a release. She wasn't out to capture headlines. What she sought was a kind of catharsis, a way to untangle the memories that had clung to her like cobwebs, the guilt that had followed her for years, the misunderstandings that had lingered in the silence. By sharing her story, Raven did more than just open up about her own pain. She offered clarity to a situation that had been shrouded in quiet confusion for too long. Theirs had been a marriage that didn't burn with fury, but instead slowly eroded in the quiet mist of unmet needs and unspoken regrets. It was a marriage that had faded in fog, not fire. Through Raven's revelation, both Clive and Amanda were finally given the clarity they had been denied in their silence. She didn't just heal herself, she helped them find their own understanding, a path toward healing that had always been just beyond reach. In telling the truth, stripped of the polished versions they had shared for years, Raven brought them something more valuable than forgiveness, she brought them the truth. And in the end, that was what they all needed most. What truth have you been holding on to, quietly, patiently, until the time felt right? Share your thoughts in the comments. Thank you for watching this video with us, and catch you in the next one.